My phone vibrated violently against the dark mahogany of my nightstand, the harsh buzzing sound shattering the absolute quiet of my apartment. It was exactly 2 in the morning. I was 34 years old, running on perhaps 3 hours of sleep over the past 2 days, completely exhausted from a 70-hour work week. I was sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by empty coffee cups, staring blindly at a glowing laptop screen filled with thousands of lines of encrypted financial data. My eyes burned, my shoulders ached with a deep, familiar tension, and my brain felt like it was wrapped in heavy cotton. When I glanced over at the phone, the caller ID flashed brightly in the dark room. It was my mother, Corinne. My mother never called me this late. In fact, my mother rarely called me at all unless someone was dying, someone was getting married, or someone desperately needed a massive infusion of cash to maintain an illusion of wealth. And usually, it was the latter. I stared at the flashing name for a long moment, feeling a familiar, heavy knot of dread forming in the pit of my stomach. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold metal of the phone, and picked it up. I kept my voice low, steady, and devoid of the exhaustion that was sinking into my bones. Before I could even offer a standard hello, her voice cut through the digital line. It was sharp, frantic, and entirely lacking any warmth or basic maternal greeting. "Tomorrow, you can attend your sister's rehearsal dinner," she said, the words spilling out of her mouth like a rehearsed, military command. "But you're going to hide in the back. Do not speak unless someone speaks to you first. Do not draw any attention to yourself." I sat up straight, the cold air of the apartment suddenly feeling much sharper against my skin. The sheer audacity of her opening sentence hung in the air between us. I asked her, my voice eerily calm, why she felt the need to call me in the middle of the night to deliver a set of humiliating rules for a dinner I barely even wanted to attend in the first place. She hissed into the receiver, her breath catching with a toxic mixture of panic and deep-seated disdain. "Her fiancé's father is a billionaire CEO, Sloan. This is Blair's one chance to secure a real future. Do not ruin this like you always do. Do not embarrass us with your sad little life and your cheap clothes. Just stay out of the way." There it was. The quote that would ring in my ears for the next 24 hours, tearing open decades of old, unhealed wounds. The sheer contempt in her voice was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I looked away from the phone and glanced back at the massive corporate risk assessment file open on my second monitor. The file had the name Thatcher Group stamped across the top in bold, red, unmistakable letters. I took a deep, steadying breath, let the silence stretch over the phone line for just a fraction of a second to let her hostility hang in the air, and smiled a cold, humorless smile in the dark room. "Understood," I said softly. And before she could spit out another insult, I ended the call. "Has your family ever demanded that you make yourself completely invisible just so someone else could shine? Have they ever looked at your very existence as a liability, an ugly stain on their perfect, curated picture? Tell me in the comments, because what unfolded over the next 24 hours tore apart every single lie my family ever built." You might want to grab a drink for this one, because the level of betrayal runs deeper than just a nasty midnight phone call. I did not sleep at all that night. I sat bathed in the harsh blue light of my dual monitors until the sun came up, tracing hidden offshore accounts, unearthing dummy corporations, and decrypting communication logs that someone had tried very hard to erase. I was building a trap, a flawless digital cage, and my mother had just unwittingly told me exactly who I was trying to catch. By 6 o'clock the following evening, I pulled up to the valet stand of a historic, ultra-luxury hotel overlooking the river in the heart of the city. The venue dripped with the kind of extravagant, intimidating wealth that makes normal people lower their voices. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars cast golden, shimmering light over tables draped in heavy, imported silk. The floral arrangements towering on every table alone cost more than my first car. My mother had explicitly instructed me to wear something plain, something that would not draw the eye, so I complied. I wore a simple, unbranded navy dress that I had bought off the rack years ago, paired with sensible black heels. I blended in perfectly. I was exactly the shadow they wanted me to be. Corinne intercepted me the very moment I stepped past the velvet ropes at the entrance. She did not offer a hug. She did not ask how my drive was or how I was doing. Her eyes darted critically over my hair, which I had simply tied back, my modest shoes, and my total lack of expensive jewelry. She grabbed my elbow, her manicured fingernails digging slightly into my skin, and steered me forcefully away from the center of the room where the elite guests were mingling. She pointed a trembling finger toward a small, dimly lit table squeezed awkwardly between a massive structural pillar and the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen. "That is your seat," she whispered fiercely, forcing a tight, plastic smile as a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes passed by us. "Stay right there. Eat your food quietly. If anyone happens to ask, you tell them you do administrative work. Nothing more. Do not mention your little computer business." I looked at the small white place card resting on the cheap tablecloth of the worst table in the room. It just said Sloan. No last name. No relation to the bride printed beneath it. Just Sloan, sitting right next to the station where the busboys scraped half-eaten food off porcelain plates. I nodded slowly, my face a mask of total compliance. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked over, sat down, and placed my small black clutch purse on my lap. Inside that purse was a heavily encrypted flash drive holding a forensic audit report that proved a massive, multi-million-dollar fraud operation originating from within the groom's own family company. I sat there in the shadows, watching them all laugh and clink their expensive crystal glasses, completely oblivious to the financial bomb ticking away quietly in my lap. I was perfectly fine hiding in the back, because as I learned that night, the shadows are absolutely the best place to sit when you want to watch a castle made of lies crumble to the ground. Sitting in that dark, cramped corner, surrounded by the constant clatter of silverware and the overwhelming smell of roasted meat wafting from the kitchen doors, the ghosts of my past decided to pull up a chair and join me. It is incredibly funny how a single, sharp act of disrespect can instantly unlock an entire museum of painful memories you thought you had locked away. My mother's demand for my silence was not an isolated incident. It was not a momentary lapse in judgment caused by wedding stress. It was the crowning achievement of a lifetime of playing favorites, a masterpiece of emotional neglect. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the classical music from the string quartet fade away, replaced in my mind by the sterile, bleach-scented hum of a hospital room 16 years ago. I was 18 years old. My father had just passed away after a brutal, drawn-out illness that had systematically drained every single cent of our family savings. While my high school peers were excitedly packing their bags for prestigious colleges, I was working two brutal, back-to-back shifts at a local diner, smelling constantly of old grease and cheap coffee, just to keep the electricity on and pay off the towering stack of remaining medical debts. I vividly remembered walking into our small house on the evening of my 18th birthday. My feet were blistered, my back ached to my very bones, and I was holding a small, slightly squished vanilla cupcake I had bought for myself at a gas station. I found Corinne in the living room, holding a brightly colored shopping bag. She was handing Blair a brand new, ridiculously expensive designer handbag. Blair was only 12 at the time, but she was crying hysterically about how unfair it was that all her middle school friends went to an expensive summer camp while she was stuck in the city. Corinne had maxed out her only remaining credit card to buy that bag. When I stood in the doorway, staring at the bag, and asked how we were going to pay the water bill that was due on Friday, Corinne looked at me with cold, hollow eyes. She told me I was being unbelievably selfish. She said Blair was sensitive and needed cheering up, and that I needed to stop whining, step up, and act like an adult. That single moment cemented our family dynamic. Blair was the golden child, a fragile, beautiful creature deserving of the world on a silver platter regardless of the cost. I was the workhorse, the invisible engine expected to pull the heavy plow and take the verbal lashings without a single word of complaint. For years after that, I skipped my own college graduation ceremony. I simply had to. I was working a grueling junior analyst job during the day and taking rigorous night classes, paying my own way through every single credit hour without a dime of help. When the day finally came to walk across the stage and receive the diploma I had bled for, Corinne told me she could not make it. She had to drive Blair to a modeling casting call 2 states away. Blair never got the job. She never got any of the modeling jobs. But my mother never once apologized for missing the one single moment I desperately wanted someone in my family to look at me and be proud. And then there was Aunt Greta, the undisputed chief of my mother's flying monkeys. Just 3 weeks prior to this dinner, Greta had called me, her voice dripping with that sickening, fake Southern concern that masked pure venom. Corinne tells me you are still doing that little freelance computer repair hustle, going door to door fixing laptops for seniors. Greta had chuckled softly into the phone. It is so incredibly brave of you to keep struggling along, especially now that our Blair is marrying into a literal dynasty. You know, you could always swallow your pride and ask Declan to get you a low-level job in their corporate IT department. I am sure they always need people to reset passwords. I had gripped my phone so hard my knuckles had turned stark white. My mother had lied to the entire extended family. She had systematically reduced my life's work to a door-to-door repair gig. Why? Because the actual truth was entirely too threatening to her narrative. The truth was that I was the founder and chief executive officer of a highly elite corporate digital forensics firm. I did not fix broken laptops. I audited multinational mergers. My team hunted down hidden offshore money, exposed corporate embezzlement, and tore apart encrypted digital ledgers for Fortune 500 companies. My firm generated more revenue in a single financial quarter than my mother and Aunt Greta had seen in their entire combined lives. But to Corinne, a wildly successful older daughter would completely overshadow the delicate, perfect illusion of high society she was desperately crafting for Blair. So, I became the family embarrassment, the struggling freelancer, entirely by her design. My bitter reminiscing was abruptly cut short when a heavy cloud of overly sweet, wildly expensive perfume washed over my table. I opened my eyes. Blair stood beside my chair. She looked absolutely stunning in a custom silk gown that clung to her perfectly, her hair styled into flawless waves. But when I looked closer, her smile was tight, and it did not reach her eyes. "Mom said you promised to behave tonight," Blair whispered hurriedly, leaning in close so the wealthy guests at the adjacent tables would not hear her hissing at the help. "I promised to sit in the back and be quiet," I corrected her mildly, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. "Same thing," she snapped, her perfectly manicured fingers nervously twisting the massive, heavy diamond ring on her left hand. "Listen to me carefully. Do not talk to Declan. Do not bring up your weird little tech gig. He is stressed out enough dealing with his father's board members and executives. This is my night, Sloane. My one night. Do not ruin it because you are secretly jealous of everything I have." I looked past her tense shoulder. Across the massive ballroom, her wealthy, handsome fiancé, Declan, was gripping a glass of scotch like it was a life preserver. But he did not look like a triumphant man about to inherit the world. His face was pale and slick with sweat. He kept checking his phone every 10 seconds, his jaw locked tight, his eyes darting frantically toward the main ballroom entrance like a man waiting for the authorities to kick the doors down. I looked back at my younger sister, taking in her frantic, nervous energy, the desperate need for validation that was rolling off her in pathetic waves. "I am not jealous, Blair," I said softly, picking up my water glass. "I am just quietly observing the room." She rolled her eyes dramatically and marched back to the center table, a faux queen returning to her plastic throne. She truly thought she had won. She thought putting me in the dark corner meant I was neutralized. But as I watched Declan nervously wipe the heavy sweat from his forehead with a cloth napkin, I knew something they did not. The real danger to Blair's perfect, billionaire wedding was not my presence in the shadows. It was the man she was about to marry. To truly understand why Declan looked like he was about to face a firing squad in the middle of his own lavish rehearsal dinner, you have to understand the deeply buried ghosts hidden inside his family's vast fortune. My forensics firm specializes in finding the exact things that polished, powerful people desperately hope will remain buried forever. We do not just look at sanitized spreadsheets or listen to rehearsed boardroom presentations. We tear apart the underlying digital fabric of a company. We trace deleted emails, we recover encrypted server logs, and we follow the silent, invisible flow of dirty money across international borders. 6 months ago, the Thatcher Group, a massive, ruthless tech investment conglomerate, approached my agency under a strict, ironclad non-disclosure agreement. The founder and chairman of the board, Malcolm Thatcher, was a living legend in the financial district. He was brilliant, entirely self-made, and famous for being intolerant of incompetence or failure, even from his own blood. He was preparing to acquire a rapidly rising tech startup called Vertex Corp for a staggering $500 million. On paper, Vertex looked like a goldmine. They boasted perfect user growth charts, flawless revenue projections, and a pristine, revolutionary codebase. But Malcolm Thatcher did not become a billionaire by trusting pieces of paper. He hired my firm to dig deeper, to find the rot before he signed the final check. The internal liaison assigned by the Thatcher Group to facilitate my team's investigation was a mid-level investment director. His name was Declan. At the very beginning of the contract, I had absolutely no idea Declan was dating my sister. Blair kept her romantic relationships incredibly vague, mostly because she loved the dramatic reveal of bringing a wealthy man home, and my mother never bothered to tell me the details of Blair's life unless it was a deliberate attempt to make me feel inadequate. So, for the first 3 months of the grueling investigative project, Declan was nothing more than an annoying name on a computer screen to me. And he was a complete and utter nightmare to work with. Our meetings were entirely remote, my camera always off, my voice filtered through the sheer professional authority of my firm's reputation. Declan was the absolute epitome of inherited corporate arrogance. He routinely dismissed my team's urgent requests for deeper administrative server access. He sent us incredibly condescending emails telling us we were overstepping our bounds and wasting his valuable time. "We are not paying your boutique firm to chase phantom ghosts in the machine," he had sneered during one particularly heated audio call, his voice dripping with unearned superiority. "The Vertex deal is my specific project. I brought it to the table. It is flawless. Sign off on the preliminary audit so my father and the board can move forward with the acquisition." I did not sign off. In fact, his aggressive pushback only made me dig harder. I only realized who this arrogant man actually was when Corinne finally posted a glowing, professionally shot engagement photo on her social media. There he was, the hostile roadblock from my weekly audio calls, wrapping his arms around my beaming sister, flashing a $1 million smile for the camera. The moment I saw the photo, I immediately contacted my firm's legal counsel. I documented the undeniable conflict of interest and requested a private, heavily encrypted communication channel with Malcolm Thatcher himself. I formally disclosed that his son, the internal liaison for the project, was engaged to my sister, and I offered to completely recuse my firm from the audit to maintain the absolute integrity of the investigation. Malcolm's response was swift, decisive, and brutally pragmatic. He did not care about the wedding. He cared about the money. He thanked me for the absolute transparency and gave me a direct, chilling order: "Keep digging, Sloan. Declan has been pushing this Vertex deal far too hard and far too fast. I want to know exactly why." With Malcolm's silent, powerful backing, I bypassed Declan entirely. My team cracked open the restricted, heavily encrypted vendor logs that Declan had fought so aggressively to keep hidden from us. What we found in those logs was breathtaking in its sheer criminal audacity. Vertex Corp was not a revolutionary tech company, it was a hollow, bleeding shell. They were artificially inflating their active user metrics using massive, automated bot farms stationed overseas. Worse, they were actively hiding a massive data breach that had severely compromised thousands of confidential client identities, and they were funneling fake revenue through a complex web of dummy corporations to make the financial books look highly profitable. The company was not worth $500 million. It was a ticking time bomb of massive legal and financial liabilities. And Declan knew. He was the one who originally recommended the acquisition. He was the one fighting tooth and nail to close the deal quickly, pushing the paperwork through before the federal regulatory bodies caught on to the smell of rotting data. I sat in my dark corner by the kitchen doors, sipping my ice water, watching Declan down his second heavy glass of scotch in under 10 minutes. The nervous sweat on his brow was shining brightly under the crystal chandelier. He knew the final, damning audit report had been securely delivered directly to his father and the board of directors yesterday afternoon. He knew his golden goose was dead and cooked. What I did not fully understand at that exact moment was just how far Declan had gone to protect his web of lies, and how deeply my own flesh and blood was tangled up in his desperate, pathetic criminal conspiracy. The heavy wooden kitchen doors swung violently open, hitting the back of my chair and severely jostling my small table. A frantic waiter offered a quick, totally indifferent apology before rushing past me with a massive silver tray loaded with expensive appetizers. I took the chaotic opportunity to slip away unnoticed, navigating the crowded, noisy room until I reached the quiet, pristine sanctuary of the hotel's luxury marble restroom. I walked into the furthest stall, locked the heavy door behind me, and pulled my phone from my clutch. I had one missed call and 3 highly urgent, encrypted text messages from Naomi, my senior data analyst, and the absolute closest thing I had to a best friend. Naomi was incredibly sharp, deeply cynical, and the only person in my life who routinely told me to stop letting my toxic family treat me like a disposable doormat. I dialed her secure number immediately. She picked up on the very first ring. "Sloan, we have a massive, catastrophic problem," Naomi said, her voice tight and vibrating with pure adrenaline. "I just finished running the final security sweep on the Vertex report we submitted to the Thatcher board yesterday." "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice low so it would not echo off the marble walls. "Someone downloaded the master file from our secure, read-only server," she explained rapidly, the sound of her frantic typing echoing through the phone line. "They stripped our firm's digital watermark off the PDF file, completely changed the title page, and re-uploaded it to the Thatcher internal network under a completely different author name." My blood ran instantly cold. "Who did it?" "Declan," Naomi stated flatly, her tone devoid of any humor. "He is officially claiming our entire forensic investigation as his own personal work. He submitted the altered file to his father's board of directors early this morning, actively framing himself as the brilliant corporate hero who uncovered the Vertex fraud at the very last minute to save the company from a disastrous acquisition." I closed my eyes tightly, pressing my warm forehead against the cool, smooth marble wall of the bathroom stall. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of his plan was staggering. He had spent 6 exhausting months trying to aggressively block my investigation, and now that the massive fraud was undeniable and out in the open, he was trying to steal all the credit to save his own sinking career. "But it actually gets so much worse," Naomi continued, her voice dropping an octave. "I successfully traced the exact IP address of the unauthorized download. He did not execute the download from the highly monitored corporate office. He did it from an unsecure residential network. And while he was actively connected to our server, he also accessed a hidden, heavily encrypted digital wallet." "How much is in it?" I asked, my voice barely a strained whisper. $250,000 in completely untraceable cryptocurrency, Naomi said, hitting her keyboard hard. It was a direct, structured transfer from a known offshore shell company linked directly to Vertex Core's founder. They paid him off, Sloan. They flat-out bribed him to push the bad deal through the board, and when he realized our audit was going to expose the whole rotting structure, he stole our final report to play the savior and desperately cover his tracks. The disparate pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in my mind with horrifying, crystal clarity. Declan was a complete fraud. He took a massive bribe, completely failed to deliver the acquisition, and was now actively stealing my firm's intellectual property to save his own skin from federal prison. But the residential network IP address Naomi had mentioned triggered a sudden, sickening thought in the back of my mind. "Naomi, run the registration details on that specific residential IP address. Where exactly is it located?" 10 agonizingly long seconds of silence passed over the line. Sloan, the IP address is registered to a luxury high-rise apartment downtown. The internet service lease is explicitly under the name Blair. My sister's apartment. Suddenly, the 2 a.m. phone call from my mother made perfect, horrifying sense. It was not just Corinne's usual, toxic paranoia about me ruining the visual aesthetic of the wedding pictures. Declan had actively manipulated them. He knew my firm was the one behind the audit. He knew I would be sitting at this very dinner. He must have fed Blair some twisted, paranoid story, convincing her that I was a bitter, jealous outside contractor actively trying to ruin his big career moment. Blair, utterly terrified of losing her billionaire lifestyle and her perfect wedding, panicked and immediately begged our mother to call me in the middle of the night to force my absolute silence. They did not just want me to hide quietly in the back of the room. They were actively, knowingly helping a corporate criminal steal my life's work, all to protect a lavish wedding built entirely on lies, bribes, and stolen money. If you were standing alone in that cold marble bathroom, holding the absolute proof that your own mother and sister had conspired to silence you just so a thief could prosper, what would you honestly do? Would you storm out into the ballroom and scream at them in front of 80 people? Would you flip a table covered in expensive crystal? Tell me down in the comments below. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. A strange, incredibly icy calm washed over my entire body. I hung up the phone with Naomi, opened my small black purse, and gently touched the cold metal of the encrypted flash drive. I checked my reflection in the large mirror. My cheap navy dress looked perfectly unremarkable. My face was a carefully constructed mask of polite indifference. I unlocked the stall, stepped out of the restroom, and walked purposefully back into the glittering ballroom. I was completely done hiding. It was finally time to burn the castle to the ground. I returned to my shadowy, isolated table just in time for the catering staff to serve the extravagant main course. The empty seat next to me was now suddenly occupied by Aunt Greta, who had clearly consumed far too much expensive wine during the cocktail hour. She leaned in dangerously close to me, her breath smelling heavily of aged oak and thinly veiled malice. "So, Sloan," she slurred slightly, her watery eyes scanning my plain, unbranded dress with a look of poorly disguised pity. "Corinne tells me you are still doing the whole freelance tech support thing. Fixing old routers, removing annoying computer viruses for elderly people. It is very noble of you to embrace such a simple, unambitious life. Not everyone can handle the intense pressure of real, high society success like our Blair is about to experience." I slowly, deliberately cut a small piece of steak, never once breaking eye contact with my porcelain plate. "It is a very honest living, Greta," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and pleasant. "There is a lot of incredibly hidden garbage in people's hard drives. You would be absolutely surprised what you find when you know exactly where to look closely." She scoffed loudly, completely missing the heavy threat entirely, and turned her attention back to the bright center of the room where the important people sat. I watched my mother, Corinne, float gracefully between the tables, a crystal glass of champagne held loosely in her hand, perfectly playing the role of the wealthy, established matriarch. She stopped near a group of older Thatcher executives, her voice intentionally carrying just enough for me to catch her words over the background music. "Oh yes, we simply spared absolutely no expense for the children today," she laughed, a high-pitched, incredibly brittle sound. "We even took out a little mortgage extension on the house to ensure the floral arrangements were flown in fresh from Holland this morning. Just a small, necessary investment for their absolutely perfect day." I almost choked on my glass of ice water. She had leveraged her actual house. My mother, the woman who had bitterly complained about the cost of my basic high school textbooks for years, had willingly taken out a massive financial loan against her own home to pay for a billionaire's extravagant rehearsal dinner. She had blindly, foolishly assumed the groom's wealthy family would quietly and generously reimburse her after the wedding ceremony was over. She had bet her entire financial future, her absolute safety net, on a man named Declan. The tragic, poetic irony of the situation was physically suffocating. She had sold her soul, and her only real asset, to buy her way into a total lie. I discreetly pulled my smartphone from my clutch, keeping the glowing screen completely concealed beneath the draped edge of the white tablecloth. I opened my highly secure messaging application and rapidly typed a single, decisive text message to Merrick, the utterly ruthless chief of legal and compliance for the Thatcher Group. I had been quietly coordinating with him for weeks regarding the legal parameters of the Vertex audit. Trigger the full digital trace now. The watermark successfully confirms the theft. Bring the physical board copies with you. Meet me in the main ballroom immediately. I hit send. Message successfully delivered. The heavy, invisible gears were finally in motion. There was absolutely no stopping the destructive machine now. I placed the phone back into my purse and took a long, slow breath. Suddenly, a sharp, repetitive tapping sound echoed loudly through the massive room. The low, pleasant murmur of cocktail conversation died instantly. At the beautifully decorated head table, Declan was standing tall, a silver spoon clinking lightly against his crystal champagne flute. The room's ambient lighting shifted subtly, bathing him in a bright, heroic, golden glow. He confidently adjusted his expensive, imported silk tie, cleared his throat loudly, and offered a highly charismatic, perfectly practiced self-deprecating smile to the crowd of 80 elite, powerful guests. "Thank you all so very much for being here with us tonight," Declan began, his voice incredibly smooth and deeply confident, flawlessly projecting the exact image of a humble, brilliant corporate leader. I sat back in my hard wooden chair in the shadows, crossing my arms over my chest. The digital trap was fully set. The bait had been enthusiastically taken. All I had to do now was sit quietly in the back, exactly like my mother had ordered, and let him speak. Thank you for watching this far. Don't forget to like and subscribe to give the channel more motivation. The real drama has only just begun, and you definitely don't want to miss the horrific downfall of this terrible man. Declan stood at the center of the lavish room, the heavy crystal chandelier casting a warm, golden glow over his tailored tuxedo. He held the microphone with the relaxed, practiced grip of a man who believed he owned the entire world. The room, filled with 80 of the most influential people in the city, fell into a respectful, expectant silence. Even the catering staff froze in place, balancing silver trays of expensive food, afraid to interrupt the groom on his perfect night. I sat back in my rigid wooden chair, tucked away in the shadowy corner next to the kitchen doors. I took a slow sip of my ice water. My mother, Corinne, had ordered me to hide in the back and remain silent. For the first time in my entire life, I was thrilled to follow her instructions. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate with Blair and me," Declan began, his voice echoing smoothly through the ballroom's pristine sound system. "Marriage is about partnership. It is about trusting someone to have your back when the world gets complicated. And let me tell you, the world of corporate acquisitions has been incredibly complicated lately." A polite, knowing chuckle rippled through the tables seated near the center of the room. I watched Corinne lean forward at her table, her eyes shining with unearned pride, drinking in the success of the man she had mortgaged her house to impress. "As many of you know, my father and our board of directors have been aggressively pursuing the acquisition of Vertex Corp," Declan continued, his tone shifting from romantic to deeply serious. It was a massive undertaking. A $500 million deal. On paper, it looked flawless. The projections were incredible. But leadership means seeing the unseen dangers before anyone else does. Leadership means asking the hard questions that everyone else is too afraid or too lazy to ask. He paused dramatically, letting the weight of his own fabricated brilliance hang in the air. "Over the past 6 months, I personally spearheaded the internal review of Vertex Corp," he lied smoothly. "And I will be honest with you all, there were countless late nights. There were moments when everyone told me to just sign off on the paperwork and let the deal go through. But my gut told me something was wrong. So, I dug deeper. I worked through the weekends, tracing their digital footprint, auditing their encrypted vendor logs. I watched him spin his elaborate web of deceit, marveling at how easily the lies flowed from his mouth. He had not spent a single weekend auditing vendor logs. He had spent his weekends at luxury golf resorts, actively ignoring the urgent emails my team sent him, actively blocking our access to the very servers he was now claiming to have bravely investigated. And yesterday, my persistence finally paid off, Declan announced, his chest puffing out with pride. I discovered a massive, systemic fraud operation buried deep within Vertex Core's infrastructure. They were hiding a catastrophic data breach and artificially inflating their revenue. I immediately delivered a comprehensive forensic report to my father and the board, effectively stopping a disastrous $500 million mistake. The entire ballroom erupted into thunderous, enthusiastic applause. Corinne stood up from her chair, clapping her hands together, a wide, triumphant smile plastered across her face. She looked around the room, making sure everyone saw that she was the mother of the bride marrying this brilliant corporate savior. Blair was looking up at Declan with pure, unadulterated adoration, her eyes sparkling with tears of joy. She knew he had stolen the credit from me, but she did not care. She cared that the lie sounded good. She cared that the lie secured her billionaire lifestyle. Declan raised a hand, humbly motioning for the applause to quiet down. In my report, I wrote a specific conclusion that I think applies to marriage as well, Declan said, his voice dropping to a serious, philosophical register. A polished exterior can often serve as a detailed map of carefully organized deception. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. He had stolen my exact words. That was a sentence I had personally written in the executive summary of the real audit report. Hearing him deliver it to a room full of wealthy elites as his own profound thought felt like a physical slap across the face. But I did not stand up. I did not scream. I just watched the audience. And that was when I noticed him. At the most prominent table in the very center of the room, Malcolm Thatcher, the billionaire CEO and Declan's father, was not clapping. While everyone else around him was giving his son a standing ovation, Malcolm sat perfectly still. His expensive tailored suit seemed to absorb the light. His expression was entirely unreadable, a mask of cold, calculating stone. Declan finished his toast by raising his glass to Blair, promising her a lifetime of security and love. The string quartet began playing a soft, romantic melody, and the guests resumed their lively chatter. Corinne marched over to my small table in the corner, her face flushed with victory. She leaned down, grabbing my wrist under the table, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Did you hear that?" she hissed softly, her voice trembling with excitement. "That is what real, tangible success sounds like, Sloane. That is a man who builds empires. I hope you are taking notes instead of just sitting here sulking. Do not even think about opening your mouth and ruining this mood." I looked at my mother's desperate, grasping face. I looked down at her hand gripping my wrist. Then I looked across the sprawling ballroom. Malcolm Thatcher had stood up from his chair. He ignored the executives trying to congratulate him on his son's brilliance. He stepped away from the head table. Declan turned toward him, a bright, expectant smile on his face, clearly waiting for his powerful father to embrace him and publicly validate his heroics. But Malcolm walked right past his son. The heavy, joyous conversation in the ballroom began to die down, table by table, as people noticed the billionaire CEO moving with grim purpose. Malcolm was not walking toward the bar. He was not walking toward the exit. He was walking in a straight, unwavering line toward the darkest corner of the room. He was walking toward the swinging kitchen doors. He was walking directly toward me. The silence that fell over the luxury ballroom was not sudden. It rolled across the room like a heavy, suffocating wave, sweeping over the tables one by one as the elite guests realized something was terribly wrong. The cheerful clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. The string quartet, sensing the intense shift in the atmosphere, let their music trail off into an awkward, disjointed halt. Malcolm Thatcher stopped less than 2 feet from my small, forgotten table. Up close, the billionaire CEO was an intimidating presence. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and entirely devoid of the warmth his son so desperately tried to fake. He did not look at Corinne, whose hand had instantly frozen on my wrist. He did not look at Blair, who was staring at us from the head table with wide, terrified eyes. He looked only at me. His face showed a flicker of genuine surprise, followed rapidly by a look of deep, unmistakable respect. "Miss Sloane," Malcolm said, his deep, resonant voice carrying effortlessly through the dead silent room. "I am incredibly surprised to see you sitting here in this corner. I had no idea you were on the guest list. Who exactly are you to this family?" Corinne gasped softly, her hand recoiling from my wrist as if she had been burned. She looked at Malcolm, then down at me, her eyes darting back and forth in total confusion. She had expected the billionaire to demand I be thrown out for wearing a cheap dress. She had not expected him to address me with the respectful tone reserved for equal partners. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I picked up my cheap clutch purse, stood up from my wooden chair, and smoothed the front of my plain navy dress. I met Malcolm's gaze directly, my voice clear and unwavering, making sure every single person in that room could hear my answer. "I am Blair's older sister," I said calmly. "And Declan was the internal liaison assigned to my firm during the Vertex Core forensic investigation." Somewhere in the back of the room, a glass slipped from a waiter's hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sharp noise rang out like a gunshot. The color drained entirely from Declan's face. His confident, heroic smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. He took a stumbling step away from the microphone. Malcolm turned his head slowly, looking back at his sweating son. "Your firm?" Malcolm asked, turning his attention back to me. "You are the founder of the forensic agency we hired? You are the lead auditor who authored the final Vertex report?" "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice steady. "My team conducted the entire investigation over the past 6 months." Malcolm extended his hand toward me. I reached out and shook it firmly. The grip was strong, an unspoken acknowledgement of the brutal truth we both knew. "Then my entire conglomerate owes you a debt that cannot possibly be summarized in a stolen dinner speech," Malcolm stated, his voice laced with dangerous authority. "Your diligent work protected thousands of our employees' livelihoods." Declan finally found his voice. He practically sprinted across the ballroom floor, stopping just behind his father. "Dad, wait, this is a massive misunderstanding. This is not the time or the place for technical distinctions regarding vendor contributions. Sloane's boutique firm merely offered basic administrative support to my internal team. I wrote the final conclusions." Malcolm turned slowly to face his son. "Technical distinctions? You are claiming you collaborated?" I could feel Corinne staring at me. Even without looking at her, I could feel her silently, desperately begging me to just accept the lie. To nod my head, take the demotion, and let Declan play the hero so her perfect wedding could proceed. Blair was gripping the edge of the head table, her knuckles white, her eyes pleading with me to remain the silent, invisible ghost they needed me to be. They did not want the truth. They wanted a sanitized version of reality that preserved their fragile social standing. So, I turned my attention to Declan and asked him one simple question. "Declan," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. "Which specific offshore discrepancy did you personally uncover first during your supposed weekend audits?" His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked rapidly, his mind desperately searching for a plausible lie. "There were hundreds of minor discrepancies in the files," he stammered, his charisma evaporating into thin air. "I do not recall the exact chronological order of my discoveries." "I do," I replied smoothly, not missing a beat. "The very first anomaly was a duplicated server maintenance invoice for a digital warehouse Vertex Core had sold 18 months prior. My senior data analyst uncovered it at 11:43 on a Tuesday morning. We flagged it for your review. You officially recommended that we ignore it entirely because you claimed the financial amount was immaterial." Declan's face flushed a deep, angry red. "I later supported expanding the digital review. You attempted to aggressively restrict our server access twice the very next week," I countered effortlessly. Blair suddenly rushed over, pushing her way past the bewildered guests. Her perfect facade was cracking. "Sloane, please stop this right now," she pleaded, her voice shaking with barely contained hysteria. "This is our rehearsal dinner. You are ruining my night. Just stop talking. Malcolm Thatcher did not raise his voice, but the sheer, crushing authority in his tone cleared the space around us instantly. Blair, please let her finish, he commanded. My sister looked at the billionaire as though he had just physically struck her. Until that exact moment, she had foolishly imagined that marrying into the Thatcher family meant she would receive permanent, unquestioning protection from the truth. She was now discovering the hard way that powerful men do not protect the people who lie to them. Corinne stepped forward, her maternal instincts kicking in, desperately trying to salvage her investment. Mr. Thatcher, I assure you this is all just a silly family misunderstanding, my mother babbled, her voice high and frantic. Sloane has always been incredibly sensitive about receiving recognition. She sometimes interprets standard corporate collaboration very personally. She is just emotional. There it was. The toxic family mechanism operating in its purest, most destructive form. If they could not actively disprove my hard evidence, they would immediately classify me as unstable, emotional, and jealous to discredit my voice. Malcolm studied my mother with a look of profound disgust. Mrs. Corinne, he said coldly, your daughter's forensic evidence is the only thing that prevented my board of directors from authorizing a catastrophic $500 million transaction. What exactly should she be less sensitive about? Corinne's practiced, plastic smile faltered and collapsed. I only meant that tonight should be solely about celebrating the happy couple. It was, I said, staring directly into Declan's terrified eyes. Until your future son-in-law decided to use his romantic toast to publicly claim my life's work as his own. The guests nearest to us were no longer pretending to look away. They were hanging onto every single word. Just then, the heavy, ornate doors of the ballroom swung open. A tall, severe-looking man in a dark suit walked in, flanked by two large hotel security guards. It was Merrick, the chief of legal and compliance for the Thatcher Group. He was holding a thick, sealed leather folder. He locked eyes with me, then turned his gaze to Malcolm. Sir, Merrick said, his voice echoing in the silent room. The digital trace is verified. We have a severe security breach. The arrival of Merrick, flanked by security, drained whatever remaining warmth existed in the ballroom. Malcolm Thatcher did not hesitate. He ordered the hotel manager to quietly direct the bewildered guests toward the open bar in the adjoining lounge. He then turned to Merrick, pointing a sharp finger toward a set of heavy mahogany doors leading to a private, soundproofed library off the main hall. We deal with this right now. In there, Malcolm commanded. Sloane, Merrick, Declan, Blair, and Corinne. Everyone else stays out. I walked toward the library, my posture straight, my expression neutral. Corinne seized my arm the second we were out of the main crowd's earshot. Her grip was bruising. What are you doing? She hissed, her voice vibrating with raw panic. Do you understand what this marriage means for your sister? Do you have any idea what you are destroying? I stopped and looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I understand you could not let her have one honest night, I said softly. I reached over and forcefully removed her fingers from my arm. He stood in front of 80 influential people and recited my deeply confidential work as his own. If he wanted the glory of the story, he gets the consequences too. You have your successful company, Corinne pleaded desperately, tears welling in her eyes. You have your money. Blair has nothing but this. Let her have this. The profound, tragic simplicity of her answer actually stopped me in my tracks for a second. My mother did not doubt my story. She did not need to see the digital evidence. She already knew Declan was lying. But she truly believed his theft was perfectly acceptable because Blair ultimately benefited from the stolen prestige. Inside the private library, the heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, sealing us in. The room smelled of old paper and expensive leather. Malcolm stood at the head of a long reading table, looking like a judge ready to hand down an execution order. Merrick placed the thick leather folder on the polished wood. Explain the compromised board copy, Merrick, Malcolm ordered, skipping any pleasantries. Merrick opened the folder, his eyes fixed on Declan. For the past 3 weeks, Sloane's firm has been quietly investigating a massive data leak connected to the Vertex report. After our board received the initial warning signs, someone deliberately downloaded the highly confidential findings from our secure server. They altered the document to remove Sloane's firm's name, claiming authorship, and then transmitted selected pages to a restricted external server. Declan's face was the color of ash. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and terror. "You have been investigating me?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "My firm investigates security breaches," I replied coldly, dropping my clutch purse onto the table. "The digital evidence identified your specific credentials." "That proves nothing," Declan spat back, slamming his hand against the leather chair beside him. "People forward files all the time. The system is flawed." Merrick did not even blink. "The Thatcher document control system records every single authorized and unauthorized transfer. Your specific board copy was opened on an unsecure residential device 42 minutes before the selected pages were transmitted." Blair released Declan's hand. She took a step back, her breath hitching in her throat. Declan's response came way too fast, a desperate pivot. "I was protecting the deal. I was maintaining communication with Vertex executives to negotiate a better acquisition price after Sloane exaggerated her concerns." "By informing the target of our most sensitive forensic evidence?" Malcolm asked, his voice dangerously low. "I was managing the relationship. You were about to destroy a massive opportunity based on a freelance consultant's paranoid theories." Declan snapped, the arrogance briefly overriding his fear. "I sponsored the acquisition. If it collapsed, I needed to show the board that I contributed to stopping it. I refined her data. And you leaked it for a payout," I stated, pulling the encrypted flash drive from my purse and sliding it across the table toward Merrick. Merrick picked it up, nodding. "We traced the encrypted account used for the external data leak. It communicated directly with a dummy consultancy firm. Yesterday afternoon, that consultancy transferred $250,000 in untraceable cryptocurrency into an offshore wallet registered under your secondary email address, Declan." The silence in the library was profound. The sound of a car horn honking faintly on the street outside felt like it belonged to a different universe. "That is preliminary evidence. You cannot prove I accessed that wallet," Declan yelled, his voice echoing off the bookshelves. "I plan to present the finalized tracking data to the federal regulators tomorrow morning," I replied evenly. Blair turned toward me, her face pale, her perfect makeup ruined by the sheer shock of reality. "You could have warned me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You could have pulled me aside." "I tried," I reminded her softly. "I stood by your table tonight. You ordered me to stay quiet. You told me not to bring up my job." Blair spun around to face Declan. "Did you take the money?" she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill scream. "Did you take a bribe?" Declan tried to reach for her, but she shoved his hands away. "It was an unrelated consulting fee," he lied, his explanations contradicting each other by the second. "I deserved that compensation. My father has overlooked my contributions for years. I needed to secure our future, Blair." Blair let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. Corinne lunged forward, grabbing Malcolm's sleeve. "Mr. Thatcher, please," she begged, her dignity entirely gone. "He is young. He made a foolish mistake under intense pressure. You cannot cancel a wedding over a business misunderstanding. Think about the guests. Think about the deposits. We have so much money tied up in tomorrow." Malcolm looked at my mother's grasping hands with deep revulsion. He pulled his arm away sharply. "Madam," he said, his voice like grinding stones, "your future son-in-law did not make a mistake. He committed corporate espionage and accepted a massive bribe." Merrick stepped forward. "Declan, please surrender your corporate phone, your laptop, and your building access card immediately. Hotel security will escort you from the premises. Any attempt to access the network will be reported to federal authorities." Declan looked at his father, searching for a lifeline, a shred of paternal mercy. He found absolutely none. The future he had tried to steal was burning to ashes right in front of his eyes. The library felt like a vacuum, all the oxygen sucked out by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. Malcolm Thatcher stood tall, unyielding, watching his own son surrender his encrypted phone and keycards to the head of security. Declan's hands shook violently as he placed the items on the polished mahogany table. He looked small, pathetic, a far cry from the arrogant man who had stood on the stage just 30 minutes ago claiming my hard work as his own. You used my company, you used my trusted name, and you used your privileged position to build a reputation you never earned, Malcolm told his son, his voice devoid of any paternal warmth. I will not endanger thousands of innocent employees to protect a thief, even if he shares my surname. Blair stared at the pile of surrendered electronics. Her chest heaved with ragged, panicked breaths. She slowly reached down, her fingers trembling, and slid the massive, glittering engagement ring off her left hand. The diamond caught the dim library light as she placed it on the table right next to the confiscated phone. Declan spun toward her, his face twisting with sudden, vicious anger. You are leaving? Now? He spat, his voice dripping with venom. You are just going to abandon me when things get tough? You knew I took her report, Blair. You knew I was using it. You are just as guilty. You loved the money. You loved the status. Blair flinched as if he had struck her. I knew you claimed her work to get a promotion, she cried, tears spilling over her cheeks. I did not know you took a bribe. I did not know you committed a federal crime. You let me build my entire life around a lie. Corinne could not handle the collapse of her ultimate investment. She threw herself between Blair and Declan, turning her furious, tear-streaked face toward me. Are you satisfied now? She screamed, all her polished society manners burning away to reveal the desperate, grasping woman underneath. Are you happy you destroyed your sister's life? No, I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding a heavy rhythm in my chest. None of this is satisfying, Mom. None of this is a victory. You have always hated that your sister had more than you, Corinne sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. You could not stand seeing her happy. You planned this. You waited until the dinner to humiliate us. What does she have tonight that I would possibly want? I asked, gesturing to the weeping bride and the disgraced groom. She had a family, a beautiful future, a powerful man choosing her. Corinne yelled back. Those words, delivered with such venom, would have devastated me 10 years ago. Now, they only exposed the pathetic, shallow beliefs behind every single insult she had ever hurled my way. I built my own future from the ground up, I said, taking a step toward her. You called my life a failure because I stopped financing the specific, subservient version of me you preferred. And if being chosen by a powerful man requires Blair to actively defend a thief and a liar, then she hasn't won anything of value. The room fell silent again, save for Blair's quiet sobbing. Malcolm turned to Merrick, instructing him to contact the Internal Audit Committee and prepare the necessary legal filings for the morning. The wedding is permanently cancelled, Malcolm stated firmly. Declan, you are suspended pending the final independent investigation. Corinne let out a horrifying wail. You cannot do this. We have guests flying in. We have non-refundable deposits. I took out a second mortgage on my home for this wedding. I borrowed $120,000 to pay for the flowers, the catering, the venue. I will be ruined. Malcolm looked at her, his expression utterly devoid of pity. The Thatcher Group does not subsidize fraud, Mrs. Corinne. Your financial decisions are your own. Corinne spun around, her eyes wild, and grabbed my arm again. Sloan, listen to me. Your company makes millions. You have the money. You have to pay off the mortgage loan. If you do not write me a check, the bank will foreclose on the house. You owe this to us for ruining tonight. I looked at her desperate face. I remembered the nights I worked until my hands bled to pay my father's medical bills while she bought designer bags. I remembered her calling me at 2 a.m, ordering me to hide in the shadows so I wouldn't embarrass her. You called me at 2 a.m, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper, to tell me I was only welcome if I erased my own existence. You wanted a ghost. Well, ghosts do not sign checks, Mom. I will not pay a single dime for debts you created to impress people you do not even know. Blair looked up from her hands, her mascara smeared, her perfect world shattered. Sloan, please, she begged weakly. I do not have a job. I quit my marketing position 2 months ago because Declan told me I would never have to work again. I do not have any savings. I owe $60,000 in credit card debt because I tried to keep up with his friends. I even dropped out of my master's program 2 years ago. I have nothing. The golden child's perfect facade finally cracked wide open. She was not a successful consultant. She was drowning in secret debt, entirely dependent on a criminal to save her from reality. I looked at my mother and my sister, standing amidst the wreckage of their own lies. There was nothing left to say. I picked up my clutch purse, turned my back on them, and walked out of the library. Behind me, my mother screamed my name one final time. For the first time in my life, I did not turn around. I walked through the hotel lobby, pushed through the heavy glass doors, and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air of the city, breathing freely for what felt like the very first time. The next morning, I stood in the heavily secured boardroom of the Thatcher Group headquarters. I formally presented my firm's finalized forensic audit to the executive committee. Following my presentation, my firm officially withdrew from the internal investigation to avoid any legal appearance of a conflict of interest, given my familial connection. An independent, third-party forensic company was immediately hired. They spent 8 grueling weeks testing every single one of our data points and conclusions. They confirmed every single thing we found. Declan's downfall was swift, public, and brutal. He was officially terminated for gross misconduct. The Thatcher Group recovered his past performance bonuses and handed the digital evidence directly to the federal authorities. He eventually pleaded guilty to multiple felony offenses related to the unauthorized acceptance of funds and the deliberate misuse of highly confidential corporate information. He received a heavy suspended sentence with strict, monitored conditions and was permanently barred from holding any corporate leadership roles in the financial sector. Malcolm did not lift a single finger to rescue his son. That painful choice cost him deeply on a personal level, but it ultimately preserved the integrity of his conglomerate. The social and financial consequences for my family arrived much faster. With the wedding abruptly cancelled and her billionaire safety net gone, Blair was forced to move out of Declan's luxury downtown apartment. Because she had foolishly resigned from her job, and because she carried $60,000 in hidden credit card debt, she could not afford a place in the city. She had to swallow her massive pride and move into a tiny, run-down studio apartment in the suburbs. She eventually found a job working late-night shifts as a waitress at a mid-tier restaurant to slowly chip away at her massive debt. The glamorous life she had felt so entitled to had vanished like smoke. Curran's situation was significantly worse. Convinced the Thatcher family would reimburse her, she had leveraged her entire life on that rehearsal dinner. When the bills came due, she defaulted. 3 days after the cancelled wedding, she called my phone 14 times in a single hour. The early voicemails blamed me for the entire disaster. The later ones begged me to cover the massive loan until Blair recovered. I responded with one single text message: "I will not finance your delusions. Do not call me again." She tried to tell the extended family that I had jealously sabotaged Blair's perfect wedding. That false narrative lasted exactly until Aunt Greta called me to demand an explanation. I did not argue. I simply forwarded Curran's aggressive 2 a.m. voicemail to the entire family group chat, along with a brief text explaining that Declan was facing federal charges for corporate fraud. The family group chat went dead silent for a full day. Then, the intense questions began, all directed at Curran. Why did she borrow money she didn't have? Why did she lie about my career? Curran eventually left the chat out of sheer shame. She was forced to sell the family house to cover the staggering wedding debt. She sold her car, canceled her country club memberships, and moved into a small, rented room. The authority she had maintained by controlling the family narrative was completely broken. 3 months after the independent investigation concluded, Malcolm Thatcher requested a private meeting with me at my office. He did not offer an apology, because men like him rarely do, but he offered something much better. He offered my firm a massive, exclusive 3-year contract to entirely redesign and manage the Thatcher Group's global acquisition security controls. Before I signed the paperwork, Malcolm looked at me across the desk. The night I recognized you at that dinner, I thought I was discovering an extraordinary coincidence, he said quietly. Instead, I discovered exactly how many people had actively benefited from pretending not to know who you really were. So did I replied, signing the final page of the multi-million-dollar contract. That was the real, lasting consequence of the rehearsal dinner. Declan lost a career built on stolen achievements. Blair lost a future built on deliberate blindness. Corinne lost the toxic authority she had maintained by diminishing me. I did not take those things from them. The hard truth simply stopped lending them support. 16 months later, my firm launched a national training fund specifically designed for young professionals whose work had been ignored or stolen by powerful colleagues. We provided legal guidance, mentorship, and financial backing to help them speak up without fear of destroying their livelihoods. I built it because I truly believe recognition should never depend on a billionaire walking across a ballroom at exactly the right moment. Sometimes people ask me if I regret walking away from my mother and sister when they were drowning in debt. They ask if I should have been the bigger person and bailed them out. The truth is, I already knew my worth before Malcolm Thatcher walked over to my table. His recognition only forced my family to confront the reality they had violently chosen to ignore. The most important moment of my life was not the grand reveal in the ballroom. It was at 2 a.m, sitting alone in the dark, when my mother ordered me to remain silent and invisible, and I realized I no longer owed them a smaller, quieter version of myself just so they could maintain a larger, louder illusion. Taking back your power does not always require screaming or flipping tables. Sometimes, it just means remaining perfectly calm, presenting the undeniable truth, and allowing the heavy silence to crush the people who were so certain it would always protect them. So, let me ask you this. If your family demanded your absolute silence to protect someone else's lie, would you keep the peace? Or would you finally tell the truth and accept the brutal reality of what it revealed? Was I wrong to refuse to pay my mother's massive wedding debt? Would you ever accept their apologies if you were in my shoes? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching until the very last moment. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Remember, there is no shame in finally choosing yourself after choosing others for far too long. See you in the next video.